Let's start with a simple example of a feedback loop. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite chair watching a good show. It's been a busy week and you're ready to relax to some graphic murders of people in jumpsuits. All of a sudden, an action scene comes on and it is incredibly loud. It's painfully loud to the point where you reach for the remote to turn it down. Ah, yes, the optimum volume. You may not think about this too much, but this is an example of a system with a feedback loop. A feedback loop occurs when a system receives an input and has a directed output in response. Let's break down the components of this mini system and see how they interact to form our loop. First, we have a source. This is where the input comes from. In our case, the source is the volume of the TV show. Next, we have a flow. The flow is a path that describes the rate or amount in which matter travels from a source to our next component, the stock. A stock describes the amount or quantity you are looking at. In our case, the stock will be the volume of the show that you hear. Now here's where it gets interesting. When the volume that you perceive from your chair is far too loud, this causes a disturbance or a discrepancy in the system. This causes you to reach for the remote or the nozzle of the flow, which allows you to decrease the volume of the TV show so that the volume that you hear optimizes. This keeps the show at a decent volume during that loud scene. The opposite is true when that scene ends and you can barely hear the show anymore. When the volume that you hear is too low, the discrepancy will cause you to act. And clicky click, the volume goes up. Ah yes, the optimum volume. The goal of this feedback loop is to remain at a stable state, the optimum volume. We call this type of feedback loop a negative feedback loop or a balancing feedback loop because the system tries to negate or lessen the impact of an input by shifting back towards that stable state. We will denote this feedback loop with a B to show that it is a balancing feedback loop. Now let's look at a positive feedback loop. Permafrost is a frozen layer of soil that remains at or below 0 degrees Celsius for 2 or more years. In the northern hemisphere, permafrost covers an area about the size of the United States, Canada, and China altogether. This ginormous area is found in Canada, Russia, Siberia, Greenland, and Alaska. Let's look at what happens to permafrost when the surface temperature of the Earth changes. First, we need to understand why the surface temperature of the Earth is changing. When sunlight hits our planet, a lot of the light's heat is reflected back out into space. What keeps a livable amount of warmth inside our atmosphere are the gases that reflect heat back to Earth. These gases are called greenhouse gases. Because humans are burning fossil fuels and releasing more of these gases into the atmosphere, more sunlight is being trapped and the temperature of the Earth is going up. The surface temperature of Earth has already increased by 1.2 degrees Celsius. Great, well, bad. But now let's start with this system to show the changes of atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases. In our example, we will mostly be looking at methane with the chemical equation CH4 and carbon dioxide or CO2. We've talked a bit about the source of methane and carbon dioxide, that is the amount coming from the burning of fossil fuels, but also the source includes the movement of carbon through the carbon cycle. These sources will flow into the atmospheric concentration. In this system, the stock amount is a concentration of CH4 and CO2. Now for the flow out. Thankfully, a portion of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is stored back into soil and vegetation on land, and in sediment in the sea. The places that capture and store carbon are often called carbon sinks. We will call the second cloud here a sink. Now, as we learned before, the concentration of methane and carbon dioxide will have an impact on the surface temperature of the Earth. When coal, oil, or gas is burned, the concentration of CH4 and CO2 goes up. As we discussed, these gases will trap sunlight and warm the planet through the greenhouse gas effect. Thus, the surface temperature of the Earth goes up. But there's more. Some of this extra heat will increase the temperature at the poles, warming the permafrost. The result of increased heat means that permafrost spends less time in below freezing temperature and it starts to melt. Because permafrost is frozen soil with plants and organic matter trapped within it, when the permafrost melts, it releases methane and carbon dioxide. This will increase the flow of gases into the atmosphere, which will increase the concentration of methane and carbon dioxide, which will warm the planet, which will warm the permafrost. And there it is, the positive or reinforcing feedback, because the input into the system will perpetuate the system's response. We will denote this with an R for reinforcing feedback loop. You will notice that our positive feedback loop does not have a cozy, stable state like our negative feedback loop did. This is what can be harmful about positive feedback loops. They push away from a stable state and the system can continue to change. If positive feedbacks push a system hard enough, the system can move into a second stable state. If the surface temperature of the Earth rises enough, the negative feedback loops that normally maintain the permafrost will disappear and the planet will move into a stable state without them. If the surface temperature of the Earth warms by 2 degrees Celsius, permafrost could release 200 billion tons of carbon. For reference, the world emits about 43 billion tons of carbon a year. Luckily, positive or reinforcing feedback loops can often be made into negative or balancing feedback loops. If awareness of the climate crisis occurs and causes a reduction of carbon dioxide and methane, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will go down. This can be done by big-scale changes in industry, such as changing the electricity grid and consuming less power in general. The collective action of individuals can also make a difference. Try to eat more plant-based meals, buy only what you need, and advocate for a better future. Also, we can increase the amount of carbon dioxide and methane that flow out of the atmosphere into carbon sinks. Land-based carbon sinks can be improved by restoring natural habitats. If we act fast enough, the positive feedback loop will balance out. Ah, yes, the optimum temperature.